Peace, I'm Diamond, and I'm talking about sadhana today. That's Sadhana. And I wanted to start to create kind of shared language and context for these topics that I have the pleasure of sharing with people because I get to work with people who are on a really broad spectrum of exposure and experience with these topics. And so I wanted to kind of start to create a database where you can come and just understand what I mean when I use certain words. Because a lot of these mindfulness and somatic practices actually have ancient roots, and there's a lot of really beautiful philosophy and context there. And I want to honor that, and also, like I said, just as a educational tool, so that you can be informed behind the why and the what and the how of these practices, because in my opinion that helps it go a little bit deeper. So I'm going to do my best to stick to my notes because there's a lot I could say, but I really want to keep this video short and sweet. So there's a couple different definitions that came up when I put sadhana into just an internet search, and a couple of the ones that I thought were really good. One says that it's a process of realization. Another describes it as the practice of going straight to the goal, which I think is a more literal translation of this word, which is Sanskrit in origin, or to be effective. Yogapedia has a pretty good definition, so I'll read that one. It says it's a disciplined surrendering of the ego in which the practitioner uses tools such as asana, which is the actual postures and movements of the yoga practice, pranayama, which is the breath part of it, meditation, which is, training your focus, and chanting on a daily basis, and that's with the intention of spiritual growth. So we can start to kind of unpack that definition, and I think it's important to start with the part about surrendering of the ego. So in modern context, the ego gets a really negative connotation, but the reality is it's actually quite neutral. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's just a part of the personality, the persona, the character traits that we take on in this life. And so you can kind of start to think of the ego as I don't know how many of y'all are video gamers, but I think the video game analogy is just bomb when it comes to the whole ego versus true self. So in that analogy, your ego is the character that you've created in the game, the clothes that you put on them, the hairstyle, the skin color, the if you play any of the Elder Scrolls, I like to choose this character that's a Khajiit, which are half cat, half human, and choose their fur color, and I decide how big they're going to be. Are they going to be a sword person? Are they going to do arrows? Are they going to be a mage? Where are they going to live? All of those things are part of this character that you make. But the reality is I am me playing this game, and then the deeper reality is, for a whole other video. But for the purpose of this conversation, ego you can imagine as that character that you've created in this world, due to the circumstances you grew up in, where you live, all these different things that are really just accessories that have been put on top of you. But your true self, your true nature is so much more expansive than that. And so when we talk about surrendering the ego, it's really about getting to a place where you are not so attached to that. I'm a Taurus, for example. That's part of my ego, though, because you could say, oh, Tauruses are just super stubborn. Well, I don't have to be. I can make different choices because I'm not just that story. I'm a whole, being that has so much choice and so much free will to make a different decision. I don't have to be super stubborn to my detriment. But when we're overly identified with those character traits, it's hard to change, even if those behaviors are getting you bad results. Being stubborn can get you fired. It can get you, with no friends. And when you're overly identified with that attribute, it's harder for you to see that you have other options. And so sadhana, part of the gift of sadhana is to start to help you challenge that, well, this is just who I am type of mentality. And then it's talking about, the method of that. So we are using asana, we're using meditation, the breath work. All of these things start to create a level of synergy or connection between your body and that aspect of you that's beyond the body, that, you know, it reaches into all the different dimensions, and it's so much bigger than just, again, this one lifetime. And our mind is the bridge to that. So some people call that bigger than your physical body. They call that your soul or your spirit or the anima, whatever it is that you identify that with. Our mind is the bridge between the body and that. And so sadhana is really a mental practice at its core. So it has 4 major components, and I'll share a little bit about that. So the first major part of it is the viveka, or discrimination. So that's the discernment between the real and the illusion. And that's what we're talking about. Are you the actual video game character in the game, or are you the person holding the controller playing the game? So that's like that discrimination, that discernment, that you start to just question these parts about yourself or your life or your lifestyle that you felt were just like actual, factual, set in stone. Starts to put you in a position to start to question that. And you can kind of think about that insofar as, for example, with sadhana, traditionally you're getting up at 4 a.m. to do that. And in a lot of ways that goes against what what your ego feels is normal or good. So like that feeling that you have when you first wake up and it's, you know, 3:58 or whatever time it is that alarm goes off, you have a whole visceral reaction of resistance to getting out of that bed, to pulling the covers off, to moving out of your comfort zone. So sadhana, it gives you an opportunity to practice that in your nervous system, in your body. What does it feel like to get out of my comfort zone and explore more than what I've come to know about myself up to this moment? And it starts to make you question your thoughts, because it's gonna, all these different excuses and reasons why you can't get up. It's too cold, it's this, it's that. You start to hear the quality of those voices and be like, okay, I have a goal. And here are all these voices coming to tell me that goal's not possible or it's not worth it. And it's not about judging yourself or judging those competing voices. It's just about getting to know them to start. At the beginning, you're just getting to notice them. And then the second part is the dispassion or detachment from the sensory distractions and the temporary nature of worldly desire and distortions. And so what that starts to talk about is, okay, now that you've identified that there's these competing voices, now you have a choice. Now you can choose to identify with those voices that say, I can't do this, I don't want to do this, it's not possible, and start to make a different choice and start to choose that other voice that's like, I'm gonna just try, I'm gonna just show up. Yes, it's cold, but I'll warm up eventually. You know, and especially because you're doing it hopefully for 40 days in a row, same time every day, you really start to see that what feels so real and permanent, like especially with your emotions, you're like, no, I'm too sad to get up today. Well, tomorrow you'll be happy, and then the next day you'll be mad, and then the next day you'll be whatever. Like, your moods and your emotions, they're not actual, factual, set in stone. They change every day. They change throughout the day, you know? And so you can start to loosen your grip on that, and just being like, I'm just angry, I'm just sad, that's just how I am, that's just who I am. It's just like you get to notice, like, well, today I didn't feel that way, and so maybe I don't have to take my previous mental loops, I don't have to take them as fact. I can challenge that, actually. And I'm not so stressed about being cold, because I'll warm up and that'll be fine. And then next there's next there's Shat Sampat, which is the 6 virtues. And that's about the mental purification, because again, because your mind is the bridge between the physical body and, you know, your more than physical form, or your soul or your spirit, since your mind is that bridge and that vehicle, that's what is being purified in this process. The 6 virtues, they break down into shama, which is tranquility or mastery of the mind. And again, that's when you're able to be like, yeah, my mind is saying, I don't want to get out of this bed, but I'm gonna get out the bed. I can choose to do what's gonna take me straight to my goal. Dhamma, control of the senses. We talked a little bit about that already, because if we're being ruled by our senses, it's hard to achieve goals in general. Whatever your goal is, a goal is, it means that you're trying to get somewhere different than where you're at. That's a really simple definition of like a goal. Well, to get from point A to point B, it takes effort, it takes energy, it takes intention, it takes consistency. But when you're overly identified with your senses, you won't do that work, because it's too much. It's too cold. It's too cold to get out of the bed at 4 a.m. I'm overly identified with being uncomfortable. Even though it's a transient experience, I'm overly identified with being comfortable all the time. So I'm not going to get out of my comfort zone. Well, in that part of the mental clarification, you start to realize that you can control yourself. You don't have to just be, at the mercy of every single feeling and sensation that you have. Or like food, like maybe you want the donut, maybe your mouth is watering and everything, but that don't mean you need to eat the donut necessarily. And then there's uparati, which is withdrawal from distracting worldly activities. For example, I'm going to try to keep it really light and cute, because there's so many worldly distractions. But let's just say from your phone. When you decide you want to get up at 4 a.m. or 7 a.m., whenever it is that you're doing your practice, well, it gets hard to do that if you've spent your whole entire night on the phone scrolling on Instagram or TikTok or whatever the case. It's a lot harder to achieve your goals when you haven't gotten to the point where you're ready to disengage, or at least, be flexible in your engagement with these things that would keep you off a track from your goal. You know that if you stay up scrolling until 2:30 a.m., it's going to be a lot harder for you to get up at 4. So you can start to kind of pull your attention back from those things that are distracting you. Then there's tritiksha, which is endurance for difficulties and duality. Ooh, this one is so good, because again, when we talk about goal, it means from going from here to there. Well, there's duality. There's a here and there's a there. That alone, there's already a level of tension between that. And when it comes to your brain and your nervous system, it's used, if you've been behaving a particular way for years, your actual brain and your neurons have stacked themselves in a particular way, so that when something happens, this is the result. For example, when I see the donut, I get hungry. You can use a different example. When I see the homework assignment due, I panic. Like whatever the stimulus is, I see the homework assignment due. And then your nervous system equates it with all this other information and experiences. And then what do you do as a result? Do you procrastinate? Do you get started immediately? Do you put it in your planner and try to make a plan to accomplish that goal, or whatever the case is? There's a level of having to go from a comfort zone to action. And when you're in your asana, when you're in your practice, you're grappling with that. For example, this last sadhana that I led, we're in plank for a good amount of time. And you have to breathe through that. Everything in your body is telling you to let it go, to stop, to put your knees down, to like quit, essentially. And when instead of quitting, when you get that same stimulus of I'm in plank position, and instead of quitting and just putting your knees down, if you instead choose to breathe, you've gotten that much closer to your goal. You learned how to endure that tension between where you are and where you're trying to go. And that's really what asana is all about. Asana by itself, it's defined as sitting comfortably in the seat of uncomfortability, being able to withstand, again, that tension of this is what I want to do, but this is going to keep me where I'm at. And so I'm going to go for it. I'm going to get out of the bed even though it's cold. I'm going to eat, I don't know, some yogurt instead of eating the donut. Whatever it is, whatever that tension is, you learn how to focus on the breath. For real, like the breath is the key. But you learn how to sit with that and not just give in to your first impulse. And then there's Shraddha, which is faith and trust in the teachings. So that really comes in when it's, it's usually 40 or 90 or 120 days at a time. And you have to trust the process. You know what I mean? Day one, it sucks. A lot of times it sucks. And you might question, like, how is this going to get me closer to knowing myself? How is this going to get me closer to being able to focus more, to having a deeper relationship with the divine? How is this going to, and you just trust the process. You just keep showing up. You just keep showing up every day. You just keep showing up. And just trusting in the technology that has come to you, that you've consented to working with, and you follow through because you've made that choice, not because you necessarily see results on day 1, 2, 3, whatever the case. Could be day 33 and it still feels the same way it felt on day 1. You don't quit because you're looking at the external evidence. You're sticking with it because you said you would, and that is so transformative. And then there's samadhana, which is single-pointed focus or mental balance. And so that's when you've been able to consistently send your attention in the same direction every day, hopefully at the same time every day, and it creates a rhythm, right? It creates a rhythm, and that is a lot more powerful than if that energy was just dispersed in a million directions all the time. And I like to think of kind of like circuitry when I think about that, because it's like, if you have your light switch over here, and then there's all these wires that energy has to move through to get to the light bulb, for the light bulb to come on. Well, when you're doing sadhana, it's as if you're sending all of your mental energy in the same direction. And so it's a lot easier for that light bulb to receive the energy it needs to come on. And that goes back to that first definition of sadhana as going straight to the goal. You're sending your energy in a straight line, essentially, as opposed to if you're not able to cultivate that mental focus. When you have a goal, your mental energy just kind of sprays in all directions. It's dispersed in all these different directions, and it's a lot harder for enough of it to come together and make it to that light bulb moment or that goal being, actualized. And that's a really big part of the mental focus in general, is firstly, creating a relationship between you and how your mind works already. What is my baseline? And then you start to steward that in such a way that you can hold a thought or hold an idea or hold an intention for a prolonged amount of time. And when they talk about like responding versus reacting, that's really what that's about. Instead of your mental energy just being dispersed because you had some type of experience or trigger or whatever the case is, instead of your mental energy going in a million directions, you're able to pause and actually choose which direction to send your energy or your mental energy or your creative life force energy. You have a moment, you've learned how to create that moment to choose where to send that. And then so those are all of the 6 virtues. And then there's shutva, which is longing for liberation. And this one, I always highlight this one because, and even if you sign up to do sadhana with me, you'll see that part of the form is me letting you know that you're choosing to drastically change your life. It's similar to that part in the Matrix where he's like, if you take this pill, your life will go back to normal. You can be the video game character all you want, no big deal. That's who you are, cool. There's nothing challenging that for you. If you take the red pill, you're gonna see the world for what it is, and you can't unsee that. And so I don't take that lightly, because I think in this world, enlightenment and transcendence and all of these different things, even spiritual growth, they're always positioned as positive. There's just it's always a good thing to be reaching for enlightenment. It's always good to be reaching for consciousness or higher consciousness. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that people aren't ready for that at every stage of their life. It's just kind of like taking somebody who doesn't know how to swim at all and throwing them right into 12 feet of water. That's not going to work out great for most people. Most people need an opportunity to just practice being in the water, and then practice going under the water and holding their nose. And like there's a gradual way to titrate these types of experiences and these types of understandings of reality, because it can be very destabilizing if you don't have the resources to integrate this experience. And so it's nothing to be afraid of, but it is something to be aware of, to really be in touch with yourself and know, like, am I ready to take on this level of self-inquiry? And do I have the resources and the support and the tools to integrate this experience? Because when we're talking about liberation, that's what the liberation is from. It's from illusion. It's from thinking that you are the video game character. When you're not ready for that level of truth, it can be destabilizing. You know, somebody walk up, just yank the cords out of the wall, and you're just like, who am I? So definitely call in like grace around that part of the practice, and really want to implore people to take that sincerely, to take it sincerely. Because once that illusion has been removed from you, it changes everything. It changes your relationships. It changes how you look at yourself in relation to your job, your career, how you're spending your time, where you live, what you eat. All of those things shift when you realize that you're not the video game character. So that's kind of sadhana in a nutshell. You know, it's 40, 90, or 120 days where you're taking on some type of level of spiritual discipline. It doesn't have to be yoga, by the way. It doesn't have to be asana, meditation. Those are just like its traditional roots, because it comes from the Buddhist and the Hindu context. But the reality is, anything that you're doing on a daily basis with the intention of self-realization, liberation from illusion, and a closer union with the divine, you can call that your sadhana. So that's it in a nutshell. Dang, I have so many notes. Yeah, let's see what else I want to say. We can kind of go into kind of the ways that I hold space for sadhana that may be a little bit different than the way some other people hold the space, because I want this video to serve as a like supplementary resource for people who decide to join that practice with me. So certain things that you can expect. Typically, I'm doing the 4 a.m. sadhana. I live on the West Coast, so that's 4 a.m. Pacific time. However, currently, I'm doing sadhana with my siblings who live down south, and I love them, and I'm just excited that they're participating. So I'm doing it at 7 a.m. my time to kind of sweeten the pot a little bit, make it a little bit easier for them to pull up. But typically, those are the two times that I honor, either 4 a.m. and then sometimes I'll do 7 a.m. But, you know, whatever time that I choose for that 40-day, we're sticking with that all 40 days. Now, that being said, it's my intention to make every single practice. But I notice sometimes when I'm in other containers, there's this thing where like they'll have other people sub their classes, which is not a bad thing. And I might explore that in the future. But I find it really valuable to take the practice with me wherever I end up going. So like I camp a lot. I be getting into all kinds of stuff, honestly. And there have been times that I've done sadhana like in a tree, because that's just where I was at the time I was supposed to do it. You know, like it gets so silly, but that's life. You know, it's not, I don't think it's accurate to put out this idea that like there's no variation. There is variation, and you can still show up. So don't be surprised if you see me doing sadhana in my house one day, and then the next day I'm just like somewhere super random in a field, because it's about showing up. Life is gonna life, and this is an opportunity to practice that discipline and to practice that consistency and that coherence, no matter what life is doing. So typically I will be there. On the rare occasion where I'm not able to be there, so like sometimes I'll be leading retreats where I'm in a remote location and literally don't have signal. So there will always be a recorded video of that particular practice available to you all, just so that if for some reason I'm not able to make the practice, Or if you miss practice and you still want to be like, okay, maybe I didn't make it at 4 a.m. today or 7 a.m. today, but I still want to stay with it. That is so much more important than getting it perfect every day, same time. Like, that's ideal, but it's a practice. So there will always be that video recording available so that you can practice, even if you miss the live session. Um, let's see. And I also want to stress the fact that this is not a class. This is not the same thing as me teaching a class, because with that, I'm giving, a lot of context, and there's warm-ups and maybe a cool down, and like, that's not what this is. This is me practicing my devotional discipline, and I'm sharing that practice with you. So it's a lot more hands off than it would be in a yoga class. I'm not going to be looking at the camera and like, giving you cues and things like that, because it's meant to be an opportunity for you to meet yourself. And so to start out, so day 1, we'll do a drop-in after practice. We can set intentions and answer questions, and we can kind of share about what we hope to get out of the practice. Like, there's space for that throughout. But like, for example, the first 10 days, the first 8 days of practice, I usually will send people a message in the morning, like, hey, we're about to start, 5-minute warning, things like that. But after day 8, it's up to you, because it's not a class. It's not you come to my class. It's about you showing up for what you decided and told yourself and made an agreement with yourself, and whatever your higher power is, that's between y'all two. It's not between me and you. And I think that's the difference. Like, even when I am teaching a class, it's still the case, but it's still the case that it's a you thing. But in sadhana, it's even more so the case, because it's important that you hear your own voice and you hear what that internal messenger is trying to tell you. So I do taper my voice back, even as far as like guiding you through the practice. After 8 days or so, you should have the flow down. I'll still be live and you can watch, but the cues become less and less over time. And also, you get to take credit for finishing. It's not about me making you wake up every day. You did that. You get to take credit for it. You get to own that. Let's see. So, like I said, day 1, we'll drop in, we'll do the practice. There's space for us to like talk and chat a little bit. Day 11, we'll have another check-in. Day 22, we'll have a check-in. Day 33, we'll have a check-in. And then day 40, I always hold some type of integration meditation. There's nothing worse than getting super high on an experience and then not having something to kind of like ground that back into the body and into the mind, so that you actually feel like you can get something out of that practice. So that's kind of like just the general breakdown. We have check-ins day 1, 11, 22, 33, and then 40. So my sadhana is free. I don't know, it feels right to make it free, but if you would like to donate, I will not stop you. And there will be a button for that underneath the link for this video, on the website. And what else? Okay, so cameras have to be on for safety, and also because this is a community practice, so it just feels weird when there's just like, like the camera's off, like we're all here in our pajamas, like thugging it out, and then this person has their camera off, and I'm just like, are you just watching? Like, it's weird. So cameras gotta be on. And again, I do also want to stress that in certain traditional practices, you wake up earlier than 4 a.m., you take a cold shower, you put oil on the body, you dress a particular way, you wrap your hair. There's a lot of other parts to that ritual. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually quite beautiful to put that level of intention into your practice. However, I find it important at this time to just remove as many barriers as possible to having people show up, because that's what works. That's the active ingredient here, is showing up consistently. Whether you're showing up in your pajamas please wear something because you will be on camera, but the classes are also not recorded. I don't believe in recording them because, again, the intention is for you to show up live. And if you can't show up live, you can do the recording in your own time, but there's not going to be like a daily recorded practice. Like, you had to be there type. That's the vibe. Let's see. I think I said that. Oh, okay. So finishing all 40 days, like, you'll get the maximum result. However, the only real goal here is to learn something about yourself. So I try not to put extra pressure on you to, like, you gotta show up every 40 days. That's the ideal, but it's just one of those things where it's like you get out of it what you put in, and that's not for me to judge or mandate for you. That's on you and yourself. That being said, though, I do want to encourage people to, again, not take this practice too lightly and to be sincere in this commitment. So in order to accomplish that, I have it to where if you miss 4 consecutive days, you will be removed from the chat. You will be excused from the Sangit, which is the group. And you're invited to try again the next 40-day cycle. And that is to, first of all, create cohesion and a level of real dedication in the group that is showing up. And to give you an opportunity, if this practice is not supportive for you or you're not able to be some level of consistent, no pressure. Like, just come back, reassess, readjust, and just come back the next 40-day cycle. Is that everything? Okay, so I typically do create like a WhatsApp group chat, but I'm not the texting girly. I'm not her. So the intention of that chat is for me to be able to share the Zoom link with you so that you're able to access that. I can put the recordings in that chat. Maybe I might drop in some like food for thought or journal or thinking prompts here and there. But I cannot sit here and lie to y'all and say that I'm going to be conversational and we're just going to be chatting. Like, that's just not my ministry. Nothing wrong with it. It's just not in my wheelhouse. Like, I'm not the conversational texter, but y'all are encouraged, definitely. And I love to see people in there chatting it up and talking about their wins and things like that. Like, that's perfectly fine for y'all to do that in that chat. I just don't want you to be surprised that, like, I'm not gonna be active in the chat for real. It's very functional for me. And yeah, I just like this is encouraging to my teacher. She used to call this a self-initiation, and it really is, because it's really your choice. You choose your own adventure when it comes to this practice. And I'll share, the first time that I did a sadhana was 2020. Yeah, it was 2020, and it was May 1st. And so I saw this thing randomly on Instagram, this person talking about 40-day sadhana for prosperity, I believe is what it was for. And that was my gateway. I wasn't in it for the prosperity, but I was a chronic procrastinator and a chronic like starter but not finisher. And I was just like, you know what? My birthday's this month. This is going to start on the 1st of the month. Like, let me just see. And there was this place of curiosity of like, what would happen if I did something consistently for 40 days? Who would I be? Like, what would that change for me? I'm about to get a year older. And that's kind of the place that I was coming to it from, just curiosity. What would happen if I stuck with something? And changed my whole life, y'all. My whole life, my whole paradigm shifted from that practice. I got to see myself through, and mind you, this was on Instagram Live, so it's not like it was on Zoom where we all see each other. It was literally this person went live every day at 4 p.m. And first of all, this person was like, she was, at least past her mid-40s. You couldn't tell it by looking at her, just gorgeous. But she was doing these things, and I think it was like 2 or 3 minutes for each posture at the time, and I could not hang. I was just like, what? Like, looking at her like, how, Sway? How are you doing this? And there was this inner wisdom that was like, Diamond, you don't have to keep your arms up the whole time. Just do it until you can't anymore, and then rest, and then get back into it. And there wasn't the interactive process of being in a class. It was just very much like I'm tuning into this thing every day. And it started that inner inquiry, that inner, dialogue. And I appreciate that wisdom that was just like, you don't have to do it perfectly, just do your best and just keep coming back to it. And I kid you not, by day 11 I was eating it up. I was just like, this is easy work, this is no problem at all. And that was amazing to me. And the word for that is self-efficacy. I learned that I could trust myself because I kept showing up. And I was like, oh, I can do this. And it started to heal and repair that part of me that had betrayed myself over and over again by saying I was going to do something and not following through. That is one thing to repair trust in other people, but it is so powerful to heal your ability to trust yourself. And I like to look at that as, we always talk about healing the inner child, but there's also an inner adult that a lot of times needs some support and some resource and some healing as well. So I feel like that was one of the benefits of doing that practice, was I was just like, oh, I can stick with something and I don't have to kill myself on the way to finishing this thing. I can just do my best. And my best was good enough to get me through that 40 days and to see myself improve. So that was just awesome. And we were working with mantra during that sadhana, and the mantra would just start to play in my head even when I wasn't in the class or wasn't, doing the sadhana. Just everywhere I was, this beautiful melody was just in my head, and it started to kind of complex. And I was just like, I want to make my own version of this practice, like of this song, because I just can't get it out of my head. And then like all these different miracles. Sadhana absolutely brings the energy of miracles because you have dedicated yourself to the divine, and the divine is so excited and happy to meet you where you are. So like when they do say like, oh, sadhana for prosperity or sadhana for this or that or the other, like that's real. That's so real. But the root of that prosperity and the root of you achieving whatever it is you're trying to achieve is that you're coming in closer contact and devotion and relationship with yourself and that power that's bigger than you and is you at the same time. So miraculously, the homie sent me an instrumental. Mind you, I hadn't talked to that person since I graduated college. So it was like years at that time. And the beat, the instrumental was perfect with what I was hearing in my head, and created a whole song and put it out in the world. And I found my teacher and I worked with her. I don't think I missed a class for a year. And that following year I did my teacher training, and the people that I have met because of coming into that community like shifted my whole paradigm. My whole timeline shifted because of that 40-day practice. Like I really can't say enough. And I will say that I was slightly prepared to do that because the year before I was just very depresso espresso, and I had been reading and being on my journey of trying to understand myself and like the world and God and creation and just all the things. I feel like I've been a seeker my whole life. But that year prior, I had started a sadhana, but I just didn't know that's what it was. And I didn't do it every single day for that year, but almost every day. And it was very simple. I had this book that I had read for like the third time called Be Here Now by Ram Dass. And finally, I had read the back of the book, because before I was just like, oh, I love these ideas and look at how cool and abstract, and I just loved the story. But there's this little tiny chapter at the back of that book that it's like cookbook for a sacred life or recipes for a sacred life or something. And I had finally read that part, and it was just talking about like all these different practices and mantras and yoga and eating practices and just all these different practical stuff to do to have a sacred life. And I was just going through a lot, and I was just like, you know what? Every book is saying meditation. Every book is saying mindfulness. Let me just try it out. Let me just try it out. And I can look back now and know that that was me deciding to finally trust the teachings and to trust the process. And so I would wake up every morning before I did anything else. I would go in my closet. I had my first singing bowl and some Palo Santo and this book. And it had this meditation in there. That was really simple. It was a breathwork meditation with some mantra. And every morning I would wake up, go in the closet, hit the singing bowl 3 times, light the Palo Santo, like be with that. And then I would do this meditation. And I did that, no kidding, like almost every day for a year. And I didn't think anything of it. I was just like, this is helping me. This makes me feel like I'm somehow, it's like when you eat food, at some point you got to poop. And you got to process that. You got to take the nutrients and release the waste. And having that practice, I didn't understand why or how, but it just made me feel somehow like I was processing something every day, and that I was being proactive in trying to feel better, because I was in a really like hard place mentally. So I count that as my first sadhana, even though I didn't know what that word was, or that wasn't my intention. I just needed some support. And so I do feel like that kind of opened the door for me to be able to align with a practice like a 40-day sadhana. And yeah, I think that's really all I want to share on the topic. I I have like so many notes here, but I feel like if I were to sit here and read them verbatim, we'll be here all day, and we're already over my 30-minute mark. So I'm gonna cut it there, and just thank you so much for pulling up, and yeah, just being a part of this commitment. Because when you heal yourself, you show up better in this world, and every person that does that, we start to see that paradigm shift that we all know that we need collectively. As they say, start with the woman in the mirror, right? So yeah, cheers to your journey. I hope to see you in the club, in the Sadhana club. And if not, I hope that this video inspired you in some way. And yeah, have a good one.